So that was a good list of things that you identified with the OpenStreetMap. Hackley, I think he's at UCL, or certainly was at UCL, is probably, I think he's heavily involved in running the OpenStreetMap project. He's written a number of papers about OpenStreetMap project. And I'm going to just go through some of the results of one of them from 2010, which is the aim was assessing the quality, how good, and what were the problems with the OpenStreetMap data set. So looking at things like positional accuracy, emissions, missing data, how much data there is across the country compared with the with Ordnance Survey products, that sorts of thing. So one of the things that he did was to assess how well Ordnance OSM centre lines for motorways, and I think he did A roads as well, matched the centre lines from the Ordnance Survey. As I said previously, while there is no one scale at which OpenStreetMap is captured, it's regarded ostensibly as being roughly 1 to 10,000 scale. So the comparison is being made with as equivalent products as you can kind of get. And in this case, they've used the OS Meridian, which I believe was ostensibly 1 to 25,000 when it was originally captured. It's quite an old Ordnance Survey data set. But you just have to choose the best comparable data set. And the idea is the Ordnance Survey is a quality assured data set, which should be almost complete, as good as you can get. So if we can compare it to this sort of gold standard of the Ordnance Survey, how well does the OSM do? Okay, so the first thing they did was produced a buffer 20 meters either side of the Ordnance Survey, the Meridian centre lines for motorways, and they measured what proportion of the OpenStreetMap centre lines were within that 20-metre buffer. And they broke it down by different motorways, and we can see that between just under 90% down to about 60% of particular motorway centre lines were within 20 metres of the Ordnance Survey centre line. The thing to notice is there's a question of, yes, how physically precise they are, how much it is. Obviously, if we were down to 50s, 20s, we'd be a bit worried perhaps. But it's quite good fit. But what I want you to see here is the difference between various roads and sections. So, for example, excuse me, you're going to move somewhere else like you're asked to. It's just tapping away. It's a bit annoying. Right. Okay. So 70% roughly of the M1 was within 20 meters, but only 60% of the M2. What might that reflect? Why do you think there might be differences? Sorry? Why would that make it less accurate? Precise. Okay, so we've got the crowdsourcing effort. Okay, yes, I can take that argument. Yes, maybe the M1 is in greater demand by OpenStreetMap users than the M2. Yeah, I can take that as one reason, yeah. So therefore hasn't been corrected, yeah. Any others? Well, it might be the way it's captured. Perhaps somebody drove up the M1 with a GPS. Somebody else, rather, after drinking a bottle of wine, decided to digitize the M2. And perhaps it got a bit wonky. So it may be the means that it's captured, or it may be that they were captured in the same way, but with greater care for the M1, whoever did the M1 just spent more time and more effort than the people who did the M2. We don't know the reasons, but we can see that there is differentiation in the the precisional error, and that it can be quite large, you know, between different roads, different areas. They did visual correspondence between the Ordnance Survey street map, centre lines, and the 1 to 10,000 Ordnance Survey maps, which I think are mostly raster. They're not, you don't get vector maps, or maybe they are, is a vector product now. Identifying where you've got, how much error you've got. So here the road centre lines pretty well match the lines in the 1 to 10,000 map. Here we've got some significant difference, particularly here on the corner here, between the difference between the lines and the maps, and they measure the distances, then they're getting an estimate. They can measure on average how far a road centre line is from any other road centre line, or the road centre line on the 1 to 10,000s. So we've got error varying depending on where you are again. In this case, just one side, another side of the railway. Again, maybe the railway is a divider between two groups of people who are different groups of people capturing the data. Maybe it was just a different day, a different time. They looked at completeness and identified all those squares and circles are identifying emissions. It's not very clear perhaps on this slide. The grey lines are the OSM feature lines, and we can see here, can't read the name of that. Is that Grange Road? It's difficult to see. There's no centre line here, no centre line here, no centre line here. So they identified the number of emissions and the proportion of emissions in the OSM data set. So that was their sort of small-scale studies, local studies for precision. They also looked at the scale of the country, England in this case, not just England, the country of England. And what they did was they calculated the length of OSM roads in each kilometre square across the entire country, and the length of, I think, OS meridian roads in every kilometre square across the entire country. The idea is that if the surveying is roughly equivalent, you should get the same length of roads in each kilometre square. They've coloured the map here, is coloured black, where there are more roads in the OpenStreetMap than the Meridian data set. White, where there's the similar coverage, and grey, where there is less OpenStreetMap than OS Meridian. And we can clearly see a pattern between where we've got much greater amount of data, OSM data, in cities and urban areas than we do in rural areas. See how the concentrations around London, that's Manchester, isn't it? Liverpool up there. That must be Cambridge. Look at the Cambridge effects there. It's huge. Obviously, people in Cambridge love OpenStreetMap data collection. Whereas in more rural areas, we've got a lot lower coverage. Why do you think, how can we get more roads in OSM than OS Meridian? Okay, so we may be ahead of the curve, so therefore there are more roads physically in the world. I don't suspect that's a major factor, but I do accept it as a factor. Anything else? Sorry? A more curvy line, yes, that's another possibility. Think about your maps and the differences that you saw on your map. I think, and this is just my guess because I don't know, if you think of the car park behind Bittams, that was in as a road on the OSM, but it is not a road on Meridian. It might be a tarmacked area on master map, but on OS Meridian, that is certainly not a road centre line, but it's marked as a road on Ordnance Survey. So I suspect the OSM people overestimate what a road is and classify things as roads, which probably the Ordnance Survey don't treat as roads. That's just my guess that that's the major reason behind this difference. I'll have to read the paper again to see whether he actually has a list of reasons as to why that is the case. Clearly, when it comes to less than, it's pretty straightforward. It hasn't probably been surveyed to the adequate level yet. We can also look at the distribution of mapping on the basis of the demographics of the area. So from Nigel, you should be very familiar with the index of multiple deprivation. Shouldn't need to explain any of that, but basically, here's the index of deprivation from the least deprived ward or borough, I'm not quite sure what levels this is, up to the least, no, sorry, this is the most deprived ward, this is the least deprived ward or unit, I can't remember which unit it actually is, and this is the percentage of the Ordnance Survey meridian coverage against the index of deprivation. And as we can see, as the least deprived areas, think Cambridge, doing very well, 60, 70% coverage of roads, depending on which measure you use. You've got an all roads and a named roads graphs there. But basically, you're 30% higher, 20 to 30% greater coverage in the least deprived areas than the most deprived areas. Why do you think that's the case? Yeah, I think that basically the people who go and participate in OpenStreetMap are mostly middle class, I think is the bottom line. They're mostly middle class, reasonably well educated. And when they're spending their voluntary time mapping things, they might rather map beautiful places than sink council estates. So I think there's a social part, a very strong social part to this. It's not only where the people live who do the mapping, but it's where they want to go to do the mapping as well. So again, this is about choice, the fact that you can't control the people doing the surveying. So how do we improve VGI data quality? Okay, I think this list mostly was derived from the Caitlin paper, if I remember correctly. Okay, it's not really improving, but getting a handle on VGA quality. So first of all, we can compare to higher resolution products like Hackley did to get an estimate of how good our VGI product is. But obviously often we don't have a baseline to compare it against. So that's maybe not so easy. Certainly not for most people trying to assess OSM map at the country level. They need to access the Ordnance Survey data as well. So you can compare to existing products to see how good they are. Once you've learned how good they are, then you can maybe decide to carry on collecting the data in the way that you've done. We've got the vigilance of the crowd. Enough people look at it. Hopefully they'll identify the problems and correct them. But there are other things that go on. So one thing is we can set up what we could call gatekeepers or curators of a data set who basically monitor the quality control. So this is how Wikipedia works, certainly for controversial web pages. You have people, moderators, whatever they call gatekeepers, who monitor Donald Trump's page. In fact, I believe the worst pages are now locked down in Wikipedia, so you can't edit them without having suitable permissions. But basically, gatekeepers keep an eye on what's going on the system, make sure that the edits are suitable, are correct, are reasonable. So that's one way of doing it. But it's just not physically possible for very large crowdsourced data sets, OSM. You couldn't really gatekeep every bit of OSM data being added across the world. It's impractical. Another thing you can do is test contributors and see how good they are. So Ashtag presented two pictures of common trees, the oak and the ash, and if users couldn't identify an ash tree, then they would reject the records, or the records that were uploaded by those users were flagged as being dodgy. Okay, it didn't stop them, I don't think, actually uploading records, but if you can't identify an oak tree from an ash tray, chances are you can't identify the fungus as well, or you're going to upload a load of dodgy data. So testing contributors is one way. Machine filtering is another. So you can run programs that flag outliers of attributes, geography, or look at submitter credentials. Like if somebody submitted 1 million updates to OSM all around the world in half an hour, you may be a bit suspicious about what they're doing, so you can highlight suspicious behavior. That's one thing, the machine filtering of problems. The final one is not about improving, that's a bad title. It's just the way of the world. One of the things about VGI data is you can collect lots of it, in theory. If you have lots of data, you don't need to worry quite so much about how good each data point is. The more data, the more power in your analysis, the more ability you have to separate signal from noise. So you simply can just do the simple sort of data volume approach. We know the data's dirty, but if we've got enough dirty data, we can pull the signal out of it. So we don't need to worry quite so much about data quality than we would if we had a smaller data set. So those are approaches not for improving with data quality, but just dealing with or handling data quality issues. Oh, this is from Caitlin, really. This is increasing participation. How do you get participation? Well, one thing to realize is many crowdsourcing efforts just fail. There is no guarantee that a crowdsourcing effort is going to work. So many students put up a questionnaire on SurveyMonkey and wonder why nobody fills it in. You have to advertise, you have to get it out there. So you have to have, actually advertise, you have to have resources and funding to advertise and get people interested in your project and engaged in your project. So while they're relatively cheap, if you don't invest at least the funds to get people engaged, things are going to fail and you're in trouble. The other thing is keeping things simple. This has been demonstrated as being one of the most successful correlates of VGI success. You get people to do something relatively simple, you'll get lots of people involved potentially. The more complicated that you make it, the more people drop off. So a prize example is bird surveys. If you ask people to identify every bird that comes to your bird table or you see in your garden over an hour, you're going to get a lot less returns than if you just ask for people to identify the common birds. You'll get a lot more responses. So it all depends on what you want to know. If you're prepared to deal with just common birds to get an overall picture of, common bird numbers, great, but don't expect to get the rarities, or including the rarities in a survey is going to reduce the number of returns that you get. The other thing is to recognize and pander your zealots. So there we go, 2% of Wikipedia users contribute 75% of the work. Highly skewed. You're going to get people, there are guys, but ladies as well, who walk that river twice a week, the Hogs Mill, looking for pollutants. If we lose them, the whole project system is effectively hobnailed, to put it mildly. So if you lose the interest of these people, these high-level users, potentially your project's in trouble. They are also the people who will evangelize for your system, go out and bring more people in, get people enthused to use it. Not surprisingly, having a nice, easy-to-use web interface with clear instructions can be really important. If people can't work out how to use your system, you're going to lose them very quickly. So usability in your system, easy to use, clear interface. Providing feedback has a huge effect. So eBird, which is the American bird reporting system in the US, changed their system so that allowed people to see their data, see how other people's data, see how much data they had collected compared to other people, and they tripled the number of submissions following that change. Now, it's difficult to actually say that change in the interface and that feedback that they got resulted in that threefold increase of submitters. There may have been other factors involved, but it was clearly, from their research, appeared to be a significant contributor in people getting involved. Obviously, you have to promote, and if you can generate a sort of social network effect, you can get an awful lot of people coming to your site. Often for a short period of time, one has to bear this in mind. Users of the internet are fickle. They will come, they will swarm on you for a few days, a few weeks, then their attention will go somewhere else and you'll never see them again. Talking about interfaces and engaging people and allowing people to see statistics, compare themselves to other people, that is an example of what we call gamification of systems, which is increasingly, it's quite an active topic of research at the moment. There's a lot of it going on. And the idea is this, is how do you use the things that getting people engaged in video games and playing games, what can we learn from the engagement of video games to use in our web applications, our digital applications. So things like providing rewards, leveling up people up, leaderboards, badges, challenges, quests, all these things that go on in the gaming world can be applied to volunteer data collection. So Court, know very little about it, is an Android app OpenStreetMap game where you solve mysteries or earn points, raise in rank, and get awarded medals for effort. So it's an attempt to gamify the OpenStreetMap data capture process to engage people further into it. And I just finally, Pokemon Go, whoops. Oh, what did I do there? Okay, I'm going up and should be going down, going down. So this is not VGI particularly. It's not VGI, but it's got the VGI being people interested. Are you all aware of Pokemon Go? Yeah, okay. I have to go to a poke stop on my way home to get my poke streak for the boy. Pokemon Go is a game based on the Google Street Map background where you go and catch Pokemon, fight gyms and shit like that. It's really, it's huge. It was, certainly when it was released, it was absolutely huge. You know, you'd see hundreds of people along Kingston riverfront, catching. It's had really positive effects. So on exercise, so it's got people, sedentary people, off their couches playing Minecraft or whatever else they play on their couches, Call of Duty, and they're out walking on the streets, seeing the sunlight, and things they've never seen before. Exercising, exploring new places, going new places to find particular Pokemon, experiencing nature and environment and thinking, I don't know whether you realize, but the Pokemon they exist in different environments. You're more likely to find a water one down by the river. You're more likely to find a grass one out in a field. So Pokemon are ecologically distributed, so that you can start thinking with your 8-year-old or whatever about the environment in which animals live, habitats, distribution of habitats, things like that. There are the gyms and pokestops where people congregate, are cultural, either natural or cultural sites that they not visit, often in their local area, so they learn about their local the cultural environment. You also meet people sometimes there. You talk to them. There are, of course, some negative sides of all this. Safety, there were a whole load of news reports of people driving off cliffs and things into rivers and things like that. Going to unsafe locations, and if you notice, there's now a thing that comes up and says, are you driving, and warns you about that. And also it says, don't go to unsafe locations, think about where you are. So a whole load of bodies got found by people hunting for Pokemon. And there was also problems with inappropriate use in sensitive locations. There was a report particularly about people in a Holocaust museum catching Pokemon, which was regarded as a little bit culturally insensitive, to put it mildly.
Sorry?
It was a gas-based Pokemon as well. Was it? Oh, no. It was a ghastly or something, was it? Yeah, okay. All right, so Pokemon Go, I think, is a great example of how the gamification process can be used to get large numbers of people engaged in geographic places. And indeed, the biologists are particularly interested in Pokemon Go because you've got people catching and finding organisms with a taxonomy, spread in an environment. Can we then get this interest and say, okay, rather than catching a go-bat or a golbat or whatever they are, let's actually catch some insects, because this is the other thing. People have been finding Pokemon and seeing plants and animals and birds around them and starting to think about the environment they occupy, live in. All right, I think I better shut up now. So VGI, yeah, just repeating pretty much what I said before. Beware. It's a great system if it works, but there's an awful lot of efforts come to nothing, so be prepared. All right, I think that's enough. Any questions? Great. All right, so carry on programming and